Welcome, everyone, to Inquirer's Gameday Central, a special soccer edition this time, ahead of the last of 8 Club World Cup games at Lincoln Financial Field. Brazil's Palmeiras plays England's Chelsea in the quarterfinals on Friday. Yes, it's July the 4th. Yes, they knew what they were doing when they scheduled it with a 9 p.m. kickoff. I'm Jonathan Tannenwald, the Inquirer's soccer reporter, and it's great to be joined by someone who was not just one of the nation's best soccer writers, but also a Philadelphia area native, Henry Bushnell of Yahoo Sports. Henry, thanks for being here.
Jonathan, thanks for having me. I was hoping that would be part of the intro. That's my main qualification here.
Of course it would be. You know that. Henry and I have known each other for a long time, and it's the time of year when you and I are both all over the place traveling. I've been covering the Club World Cup and a few other things, obviously including the WNBA expansion announcement, which is for certainly another show. And you've been at both the Club World Cup and the CONCACAF Gold Cup covering the U.S. men's national team. And you're joining us from St. Louis, where on Wednesday night, the U.S. advanced to the final with a 2-1 win over Guatemala in the semis. We'll get to that later, since there's also a big Philly angle with the U.S. team. But let's start with the Club World Cup and with the big picture of the tournament. And has it been a success? You and I are both skeptics of FIFA, no doubt, and a lot of the ways that they do things. But there have been a lot of good things in this tournament, and I would say especially here in Philly.
I think it's interesting. If you compare it to the expectations 6-8 months ago, I would say it's been somewhat underwhelming. But if you compare it to where those expectations came down to about a month before the tournament, when we saw where ticket sales were and the general lack of enthusiasm from the Eurocentric part of the soccer world, I think it's certainly surpassed those expectations. And as you've experienced in Philly, as I experienced in Miami, as people have experienced throughout the country, the South American fans, North African fans have really brought this tournament to life in a lot of ways. So I think it has been it's been good enough. I'd say it certainly hasn't been perfect. But yeah, I think FIFA will, in the end, compared to what was feared in April and May, I think we'll view this as reasonably successful.
Well, and the thing that obviously that I've most enjoyed, and I have not been shy about writing about this throughout the tournament, is, as you've said, the South American and North African fans and how they have given a lot of people, especially in this city. And I know you haven't been here for any of the games, but you know enough about the town and the people here. There have been a lot of big soccer games in Philadelphia in the 22 years since Lincoln Financial Field opened. But there hasn't been a cultural moment like we've seen these last couple of weeks with all the fans from Flamengo and Palmeiras and Botafogo in Brazil, Esperance of Tunisia, Wydad of Morocco, and of course Real Madrid. Wherever they go, they sell the building out because they're the biggest club team in the world. I don't think people in Philadelphia had really seen that before. And, the headline I wrote before the tournament started was, can Philadelphia help make the Club World Cup a success? And if the legacy of it is people seeing something that they haven't seen before or very often, again, I can criticize FIFA about a lot of things, the ticket prices being number one. But the South American fans and the North African fans have been arguably the biggest story of the whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, it's a totally different, like, we know there are a lot of passionate sports fans in Philadelphia. Like, I've been to Eagles games. We know, we get that out of the way. But it's a totally different level of passion that you see, at a different level or different type of passion and in-stadium atmosphere that you get with these type of teams. And there's actually an interesting tie-in. Like, we were here in St. Louis for the U.S. men's national team last night. Mauricio Pochettino, the head coach, talked about this after the game, just the level of passion connected to the Guatemalan national team, and that exists in a lot of Latin American countries and African countries and some European countries that just doesn't really exist here for soccer. And I actually don't even think it really exists. I would be interested to hear your perspective. It was different for that Real Madrid game, right? Like, my experience with Real Madrid in Miami, yes, it was a packed stadium, but it wasn't the full-on passion and intensity that it was even for some of these, for Boca Juniors, for River Plate, for some of these other for some of the Brazilian teams that you mentioned.
Well, the Boca Juniors Bayern Munich game in Miami that you were at is probably number one atmosphere of the tournament, because Boca Juniors fan base is enormous. They're from Buenos Aires in Argentina, for people who don't know. Their fan base is enormous. There are a lot of them who live in Miami and a lot of them who will go to Miami at the drop of a hat, and they all did. I think, look, I went to the Flamengo tailgate and had one of the best pieces of steak I've had in a while, fresh off the grill from one of the tailgaters there. And I noticed as I was walking around there and talking to the Wydad fans and others, a lot of them do live in the United States, and quite a few of them live in Philadelphia. And this is a rare chance for them to see a team that they are connected to in person. The African leagues aren't broadcast much here. The Brazilian league has a terrible TV contract here, which I think people are finally starting to realize after all this time, that they'd like to watch a little more South American soccer in the United States, which is great. And I think, I mean, look, I can very easily get into, and I will in a moment, about what a lot of people really took away from this. But what I will say about Real Madrid before I get to that is, with Real Madrid, which is, as we've said, the biggest club team in the world, the most popular club team in the United States, as much as people think it is Manchester United or Manchester City, it is Real Madrid, and Barcelona is second, and all the English clubs come after that. And when you go to a game here, you see it because you see the incredible diversity of white European background, but also Latino, African, Asian. They're from everywhere, and they're all wearing Real Madrid jerseys, no matter where they come from. I was at the games the previous times they played in Philadelphia in 2011 and 2012. I was at both of those, and being at this one, you could tell it was different. You could tell it was a real game and not just an exhibition. Lincoln Financial Field, I think, naturally lends itself to a loud atmosphere because of how it's built architecturally, in a way that Miami doesn't, and maybe some other stadiums like Charlotte don't. But it felt different. And that's something that I will remember for a while. And the other thing, which I think we have to get to, I talked about this a bit in a piece I did with Stephanie Farr, one of our columnists, a few days ago. It made the rounds a bit. You probably read it, Henry, about her first experience with the passion of soccer fans. And naturally, we were both asked immediately why Eagles fans can't have flares and smoke bombs in the stands at their games. I'd probably better not answer that question, so I think I'll leave it to you.
No, I would love to hear you answer it, because I think it's an interesting, I mean, it's interesting for a lot of reasons. But what's the answer?
I think I might be run out of town if I say too much about it. But what the polite way that I will put it is that, in fact, most of the soccer fans you meet at a World Cup, even though they have flares and smoke bombs, are really nice, down-to-earth people. The stadium security might not know, because they haven't experienced before, what to do if they're just standing there letting off a smoke bomb. When some of the Wydad fans threw a flare on the field, that was bad. But if they're just standing there letting off a smoke bomb, or if they're just standing there in a crowd of Boca Juniors fans jumping up and down, they broke some seats in Miami. We know that was bad. But if all they're doing is jumping up and down, and stadium security is not used to seeing that, that's where it gets to be a problem.
Right.
And I hope that going into next year, there's now a little more sort of experience logistically at how to handle these things and make sure that they don't become problems. Because for the most part, in all these games across the country, there's been very few actual crowd problems at all.
Yes, I've actually been pretty impressed. There have been some issues here and there, some small issues, but by and large, I think stadium security teams who were not used to dealing with this at anything remotely close to this level in the past handled unfamiliar situations pretty darn well. I was in the Boca Juniors section at the start of their game against Bayern Munich, and it was very clear that it was overcrowded, and there were people in the aisles. Also, Boca Juniors, like, it's just what people do in Argentina at Boca Juniors games back home. They don't just stand; they stand on the seats, and they aren't used to like seats with armrests and backs. These are just like bleachers in Argentina usually. So here, a lot of people are standing up on the armrests of seats, and that's not ideal. There were hundreds of seats that were to some extent broken at Hard Rock Stadium in Miami because of this. But security, I think, recognized, at least from what I could tell, that if you go down and punish everybody for this, or really get in their face and really are adamant about getting them down, that's not like this. They're standing on the seats comes from a good place. It comes from just passion for the sport. And it's just it could create trouble. B, it's just going to ruin the experience for a lot of people if you're very aggressive about it. So I think that was like that type of thing was, and not just in Miami, in other places as well, has been handled pretty darn well. And the other thing that is interesting, and people in Philly will experience this with Palmeiras tomorrow night, is that there's a lot of coordination between the authorities at the stadium and the fans in advance of the game, and they know what they can bring in. And so Palmeiras fans will set up, probably 4 or 5 hours before the game. They'll be allowed into the stadium. They'll put stuff on seats to create kind of a mosaic. Their drummers will be allowed in. Their banners will be, allowed into the stadium and set up. And these are people who are traveling from either all around the United States or even from Brazil, following this team. And they're very accustomed to this wherever they go. They follow the team wherever. And FIFA and the local authorities have worked with them and are prepared to not just not necessarily try to control their passion, but to facilitate it as well.
Yeah. And we should say that FIFA and a lot of the cities, and I think Miami is the one where this came to mind, we're under some pressure going into this tournament to get this right, because at the Copa America last year, which was organized by CONMEBOL, the South American Confederation, it was not organized by FIFA. It was not organized by U.S. Soccer. It was not organized by MLS for all the conspiracy theorists out there. It was not organized by a lot of different entities that have much better experience in handling this stuff in the United States. And things did not always go well. And FIFA was under a lot of pressure to get this right.
Yep. And in some cases, they almost, like in Miami, my sense was that they almost overcorrected in some cases, and there was a lot of security measures, and there were in other cities as well. And in the end, they weren't necessarily World Cup level security measures, but they prepared for a big influx of people. And as we talked about with the whole discussion around ticket sales and empty seats, like these stadiums, most of these stadiums have not been full. And there was not this, huge rush of people and a surplus of demand for these games. But yeah, it is certainly for the most part, it is happened smoothly without anything like we saw at last year's Copa America semifinals or final. And I don't think anybody is really that worried about anything happening in these latter rounds either.
I'm certainly not. Ticket prices is something that we've all been talking about, all along here. And a number of people, friends of yours and mine from this part of the world and also from other parts of the world, who've come in and said, well, a lot of these cities have smaller stadiums where the MLS teams play. Maybe the game should have been there. And my argument quite resolutely in response has been, no, the ticket should have been $50 from the outset instead of $150, because people want to go to games in all of these cities, and they will go if the ticket, like Ticketmaster is using dynamic pricing, which if you go to a Taylor Swift concert, you're used to, and you assume the prices are only ever going to go up because that's what happens most of the time. And lo and behold, they have gone down. And a lot of people were not paying attention when they went down, so they assume the tickets are still too expensive until it's almost too late. So as I said, every game in Philadelphia, for example, has drawn at least, I believe, 25,000 people, if not more, which is far more than Subaru Park's capacity at 18,500. You can't have any of these games there, I think.
Right. I mean, the problem, right, is that there aren't enough 40,000 seat stadiums in this country. It's either you get the massive NFL stadium or you have the 20 to 25,000 seat MLS stadium.
Sure, and I think that's part of it. And But I also know of a lot of people in a lot of places who, if the tickets were $50, especially for a 3 o'clock game on a Monday, like the LAFC Chelsea game in Atlanta was one that everybody talked about early on, where the crowd was 25,000 in a 70,000 seat stadium. Well, the tickets were $150. If the tickets were $50, then people would have taken 2 hours on their lunch break and gone to watch the underdog try to pull off an upset.
Yep.
And that's a lesson I don't think FIFA's ever going to learn. But what do you make of all that?
I think, well, so FIFA's big problem in all of this, in pricing it, in organizing it, in marketing it as well, I think especially in marketing it, was that they called it a World Cup and assumed that everybody would take to it like a World Cup, without realizing that that a lot of the US market, who was not fans of any of these specific teams, just really had no idea what this thing was or why it was important or how it was different than the friendlies that these teams play every summer over here. And they priced it like a World Cup in a lot of ways. This was, I don't have data to fully back this up, but this was probably the most expensive, based on the way FIFA priced it back in December, January. This was probably the most expensive soccer tournament ever from a ticket price perspective. And it was the first of its kind, right? Which is just that's a ridiculous dichotomy. And they should have recognized early on that this was a startup that they had to build. And instead, to your point, the prices have since come down, but it immediately got this reputation as a cash grab where the ticket prices were way too high. And that not only sticks from a perspective of, oh, we don't want to pay that much for tickets for the fans, but it also sticks from a reputational perspective, and it frustrates fans. And I think that's one of the reasons that ticket sales were so slow, even after the prices came down.
I'm looking at the bracket. We'll do one more question on the Club World Cup, and I'm looking at the bracket. One side is Fluminense of Brazil, Al Hilal of Saudi Arabia, then Palmeiras, Chelsea. The other is the all-European bracket with all the big stars: Paris Saint-Germain, Bayern Munich, Real Madrid, Borussia Dortmund. I know a lot of people who think PSG is going to win this thing. I cannot in good conscience. Here is my public confessional at long last. I've been a Paris Saint-Germain fan for 25 years. I cannot in good conscience pick them to win a tournament. I cannot help thinking Real Madrid is going to win this thing because they always do in some form at the end of the day. What do you think?
It's weird because you have the three, I think what we would all agree are the three favorites at this point on one side of the bracket, which is PSG, right, Bayern Munich, and Real Madrid. I liked what I've seen from Bayern Munich, to be honest, despite that last group stage game. But the interesting part of this, as you kind of laid out, is that we're going to get a team in the final that was not one of the top five favorites going into this tournament. It could be Al Hilal, who has been really impressive, and there would be a very interesting angle there in that their majority owner is also one of the primary financial backers of this tournament, which
among many ways to put it.
Yes. Or you could get Chelsea, who is probably the European club that has maybe complained the most about the conditions and the atmospheres and the weather delays and things like that, and frankly didn't look too interested in being here when they lost to Flamengo in the group stage. Or you could get Palmeiras, who was the big Brazilian team coming, or one of the two big Brazilian teams coming into this, but I'm not sure they've been all that impressive on the field yet. So you're going to get one of those teams against only one of PSG, Bayern, or Real Madrid. I think we can count out. I'm counting out Borussia Dortmund, to be honest.
Yes.
So I don't know. I might go with Bayern at this point. I think they stand a pretty good chance against PSG on I guess a Saturday. It is.
That would not surprise me either at all. Let's flip over to the Gold Cup, since, as we've said at the start, you're in St. Louis. You're going to be heading to Houston for the final. At the start of the summer, Mauricio Pochettino said, I want my guys. I want to see some guys in here to see if they have the grit and the heart that some of the big names in Europe didn't have. He did not let Christian Pulisic come for just the friendlies at the start of all of this and not the Gold Cup. He laid down the law. He gambled, and so far he is winning his gamble. What do you make of what this team has done so far?
He's winning his gamble barely, I'd say. The margins have been thin. The performances haven't been all that impressive. They made a big deal out of, they did have that fight that he wanted to see against Costa Rica in the quarterfinal. Did they have it last night against Guatemala, who is the 106th ranked team in the world? I don't really know. They were, I think Guatemala had more possession, which isn't necessarily the best indicator, but they took more shots. It was a relatively even game, I'd say, even after the U.S. The U.S. went up early. So it's tough. He clearly has one guy who he loves, who is Diego Luna, who scored last night again, and I think has probably pretty definitively and adamantly established himself as part of that. Maybe not a starter, but part of this group for the next year. He is going to be. I think I would be shocked at this point if he is not on the World Cup roster. Even if he struggles in MLS over the next 12 months and doesn't really play well when the U.S. plays higher profile opponents in friendlies. Beyond that, there are some guys who have at least earned another call up in September, October, November, but I'm not sure, just because the level of play has been significantly lower than the level of play that they're going to need to hit next summer at the World Cup.
Well, and I think we knew that was going to happen because this group is obviously less talented than the big stars. Somebody asked me, at the start of the tournament, this thing's only going to produce players 23 to 26 for the World Cup team. And my response was, if it puts 4 players on the World Cup team, it's a smashing success.
Right.
And I think the gamble has been won at this point, whether or not they beat Mexico, because what they had to do was not lose to somebody demonstrably worse than them. And they, as you said, they'd done just enough to get to that point. Because if they'd really lost it in the group stage, U.S. Soccer would have a very big decision to make about whether Mauricio Pochettino was going to be able to get this ship to the World Cup in the first place in terms of sailing it, there.
Yeah.
But you said Diego Luna, I think you're right. I think if Mauricio Pochettino has unlocked Malik Tillman, that's a success story. If he's gotten Jack McGlynn to play enough defense to be suitable for the national team, that's a story, which I'm not convinced he has yet, but we've seen some good things from McGlynn and the ability to construct a team around him where he doesn't have to play as much defense as he did on the Union. And then, yes, we'll see in the fall when they place Japan and South Korea, and from there on, other big teams leading up to the World Cup.
Right.
But if this group has done enough to make, I'm going to return to a theme here, Weston McKennie and Gio Reyna realize they have to work a little harder to keep their national team places. That was the point all along. And now we'll find out where it goes.
But I think the difficult part, and you and I have talked about this, and I've talked about it with other people, like, has anybody on this roster really made enough of a case for themselves that it wouldn't be a massive controversy if Mauricio Pochettino put them in a World Cup starting lineup instead of Weston McKennie? Like, is anybody even close to Weston McKennie's level? And I don't think anybody has proven that yet this summer. So the interesting part of this is going to be, how do you integrate the guys who have impressed this summer with the guys who aren't here, but we know have to be a part of the group next summer for this U.S. men's national team to hit their ceiling? Because there's only there's a pretty clear group of like 11 or 12 players who are at, just from a talent level and a experience and performance level at bigger clubs, that would be capable of driving this team to a World Cup round of 16 quarterfinal, etc. And I don't know if there still seems to be a pretty big gap between those guys and some of the guys who are obviously, we're not talking about Tyler Adams and Chris Richards. Those guys are here this summer and are also locked for the World Cup next summer. But it's going to be that how do you mesh this group with the group that is not here right now, and specifically some of the guys that Pochettino has seemed to be sending implicit messages to. That's going to be fascinating to see this fall, especially.
Well, it's interesting that you said Weston McKennie, because if you'd said Gio Reyna, I said yes. I would have said yes. Luna and Tillman have both gone up over him.
Yes, I agree.
And McKennie, because of the position that he plays, and look, when he's playing at a high level, he's terrific. When he's not playing well, and when he says to you and me, as he has said a number of times over the years, and I realize that I criticize Weston McKennie a lot. I have criticized Weston McKennie a lot over the years, including when he says, yes, when Tyler Adams is playing behind me, I can go do whatever I want, which really annoys a number of us in the media. I realize I've said all these things, but between the position he plays and the talent he has, that's what makes it so frustrating.
Yeah, but also, I think at this point, he has earned a lot of he hasn't earned Mauricio Pochettino's trust yet, but he has earned a lot of people's trust that in big moments, he will show up. And that's what, and the weird dynamic with the national team is that for a player like him, the big moments are Champions League games with Juventus and big Serie A games and derbies in Italy. It's not Panama in the Nations League. There's a different level of pressure there. And I think that one thing that Mauricio Pochettino didn't even factor in as a potential dynamic when he came here to the US was just that these national team games wouldn't be the most important games that these guys are playing, because he said this, that's not how it is in Argentina, that no matter what the opponent or the competition or friendly game that it is, the national team games are always the most important. And that's how it is in a lot of other countries that he's lived in. He spent the past 3 decades of his life in England, Spain, and France.
That's how it was here for a long time. And part of his job is to reinstill that and get these guys to play like Argentines. Right. And, that to me, again, to a lot of us in the media, and I know to some fans as well, that has been the frustrating thing. I have one more question that I want to ask you, and it is certainly a question that we would ask being at the Inquirer and you being from Philadelphia, which is, there are 8 guys with ties to the Union on this U.S. squad, which is a remarkable achievement for a team that doesn't win very much in MLS, but they develop lots of elite national team players. And as much as we might have thought that Brendan or Paxton Aronson would be one of the stories of the summer, it has turned out to be Matt Freese, the former backup to Andre Blake, who then went to New York City FC, became a starter, landed in the U.S. starting job somewhat of his own making, but also by Matt Turner's errors and by Zach Steffen and Patrick Schulte's injuries. How do you assess what he's done? Because Pochettino seems to like him. People I know wonder if he's going to be the starter now. I'd like to see Steffen and Schulte get another shot at some point. But the way Pochettino is, do we think Freese is the guy now?
I don't think he's necessarily the guy. And I think Pochettino, so he gave Freese the job for this month at the start of the month, or at least at the start of the Gold Cup. And it's clear he is the guy for this summer. He's been asked about it several times in press conferences throughout the month. And each time it seems like he tries to clarify that this is happening because Matt Turner did not play for his club at all over the past year. And if Matt Turner begins playing and performing reasonably well for a club, perhaps Lyon in France, over the coming year, given his track record with the national team, I think there's a decent chance that he eventually retakes that job. In part because, so Matt Freese had one massive moment, right? In the quarterfinal penalty shootout, he saved 3 of Costa Rica's penalties. He was the hero of that game. Other than that, even last night, I thought he was pretty shaky at times. He made a mistake in the third Gold Cup game. He's especially shaky with the ball at his feet. I think I wouldn't even call it passing. Sometimes his kicking is not the best. So I certainly don't think he has definitively leapfrogged Matt Turner. I also don't think he's quite done enough yet to rule out the possibility that you mentioned, that Steffen or Schulte would get a shot when they're healthy in the fall. I do think it's very much an open competition, and maybe if you had to bet on one guy to be the starter next summer, maybe it's Matt Freese at some point, which a month ago would have been a pretty remarkable thing to say. Nobody would have said that. My money would probably still be on Matt Turner if he can, with the thought that he will get his club situation figured out. But Matt Freese is certainly, he's an impressive guy. He's a likable guy, and I think he has done enough to certainly be a part of this team, even if he's not the number one.
Well, it's very interesting stuff. We promised that we'd go about half an hour, and we have gone half an hour. So Henry, thanks very much for coming on. Safe travels along the way. I'll see you down the road, I'm sure. And thanks everybody for tuning in to this edition of Inquirer Game Day Central.